Hello students, yesterday we were seeing that how the footprints were actually forming without a person there, one footprints were formed from nowhere as the child saw them in shock, and then further footprints followed one after another, descending their steps and progressing down the street. Actually, the footprints were following from the steps, as if someone is just descending from the steps, and then it followed onto the street also, the footprints, but there was no person, but only the footprints was following. It was actually the invisible man who was walking there, and his footprints was actually forming on the steps and on the street, but he is not seen, but his impact can be seen on the ground. His body is only invisible, but whatever the activities he does is not invisible. Suppose he has picked something in his hand, then the thing will be seen, but his hand and his whole body will not be seen. And if he is wearing any cloth, then the cloth will also be seen. Only his body parts have become invisible. H.G. Wells has written the story in a quite rational way. He has tried to give it a form of logic. He has not kept everything illogical. In films we have seen that if a person become invisible, his clothes, even though he is wearing clothes, he is not seen. So means to say that his along with his body parts, his clothes and other belongings also becomes invisible. But that's quite not rational scientifically. If a person has become invisible, then only his body should become invisible, not everything that it touches can become invisible. In this case, in the story of invisible man, even whatever he eats, that is also seen, from going through inside her food pipe, and then in the stomach and intestines, and how the food is circles, everything is seen in his case. Only once the food get digested properly in his system, absorbed properly in his system, only then the food becomes invisible. Otherwise everything of his whatever he touches, whatever he eats, everything is seen, but only his body is not seen. He's physically become invisible to the naked eyes. So according to in this story, so as this invisible man was walking, how he reached there, why he reached there, and who were those children who was seeing him, that's what we would get to know as you continue the story. The boys actually started to follow the footsteps which was following down the street, which was following on the steps, fascinated until the muddy impressions become fainter and fainter, and at least disappeared altogether. Those two boys actually followed the footprints, and they were quite fascinated. When you are fascinated with something, it means that you have become fascinated by watching something. You are excited, you are enthralled, you are just engrossed in it by watching something. But the muddy impressions slowly and steadily started to get faint. Faint means student, it starting to get disappear slowly and steadily, gradually disappear. Fainting, कोई भी चीज जब धीरे धीरे फीका होने लगता है, that is known as faint. As take the example of rainbow. For few minutes, for few time, you can see the rainbow in the sky, but slowly and steadily it starts to faint. And that's what it happens with the footprint impression here also, because these footprint impressions was actually muddy impressions. So as the mud was started to dry out in the invisible man's feet, it impressions did not make it. Only muddy impressions will be made only when the mud is quite wet. Once the mud is dried out, then it impressions will not be formed on the ground. If you have walked, so if you have just come out recently from the muddy area, from a marshy area, then you will form a lot of footprint on the ground. But once the mud that was stuck in your feet dried out, then the footprints will not be formed on the ground if you walk. So it's very simple. We will continue the story. This we will have to finish the story, but the story is not very long, but it will take 2 or 3 days in online classes, because we do not have as much time as we generally have in the classes of a school. We generally have 45 minutes for one period, but here I can maximum take to 5 to 6 minutes, and in that I cannot explain, I cannot actually complete a story in 2 or 3 classes. But actually we can also, if I explain you the summary of a page by page summary. So far I am teaching you line by line, or probably the plan was actually to teach paragraph by paragraph. Explaining paragraph by paragraph is actually the best way of reading the literature. If you understand the meaning of full paragraph by reading together, just read one paragraph at a time and then understand the whole meaning of the paragraph, then move on to the next paragraph. That is the best way of understanding a literary story. But here I will, from tomorrow onwards, we will see the summary and explanation of page by page. The meaning of one page and one explanation of one whole page. That's what I will try to cover.